What do you have? What do you have to present before an eternal God that could possibly gain you eternal life? Are you going to come to Him with church membership? Are you going to come to Him with the fact that you got baptized? You're going to come to Him with the fact that you're of a certain culture or race, ethnicity, whatever it might be, or that you went on mission trips? That you gave money to the poor, to the sick, to the lame, that you gave your life for some type of service? I guarantee you it'll fall short. But, boys and girls, if you cling to the old rugged cross, not a cross that we can take right now, not this cross right here. This is not old and rugged. That's rather new in comparison. The cross that we cling to is stained. It's stained with blood. Blood that's divine. Blood of the eternal God who was made man. He suffered and died for us. And with that cross, we have access to heaven. So when we come to God, we say, God, the only thing I'm clinging to is the work that you did on the cross 2,000 years ago. And I'm going to cling to that till the day that I die. That's my only hope. That's my only confidence. That's my only glory. I'm not going to glory in anything else but the cross. It's a beautiful song. I think it's probably in my top 5 favorites for sure. All right, we're in the book of 1 Kings. Some people remembered that, obviously. We're going to be in chapter 10. We're talking about the Queen of Sheba. Anybody know where the Queen of Sheba is from? Obviously, Sheba. Anybody have any clue? I didn't really know where it was. Has anybody ever studied it to find out where Sheba is? I've heard it said that it's in Ethiopia. Do you know what Ethiopians look like? Anybody seen pictures or watched videos of Ethiopians? Most of them are black, very, very black. And you know how far Ethiopia is from Jerusalem? 2,700 kilometers. If you wanted to travel 2,700 kilometers today, guess how long it would take you? If you left at breakfast one morning, the next morning by breakfast, you would be almost there if you drove really steady. Can you imagine how long that would take with a caravan of animals? To get on a camel and say, I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to see a king. Because I've heard some things about a king that's in Jerusalem that have astounded me, and I have to go see him. This Queen of Sheba, she was intelligent, and she wanted to know the truth. Remember some other wise men that once made a journey all the way to Israel? They came to Bethlehem to seek a king as well. They were wise men, and they traveled a long distance to see the baby Jesus. The Sheba's queen was the same way. She had heard that there was a man in Jerusalem that was extremely wise and very, very wealthy, but she didn't believe the stories. But she thought, just in case there's some truth to this story, I have to go and see this king. I have to go and find out to see if there's any truth and validity to how great this king really is. So she didn't hop in her car. She didn't get on a jet. She didn't get on a boat. She had to cross the land with a caravan, possibly with an entourage. She's obviously wealthy. She's a queen. She's got men with her, people that will help her, but she's traveling slow. It would have taken months to get to Jerusalem. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, so that was one thing that she had heard. There's this great king in Jerusalem, but something about this king, because the name of Jehovah, the Lord, keeps coming up. The king, Jehovah, God of heaven and earth, King Solomon, I got to go see what this is all about. What kind of connection does he have to this great king? She had heard the fame of Solomon and the name of the Lord. She came to prove him with hard questions. She came prepared. She had a list, a book. As she traveled along, she looked at the stars perhaps and thought, I wonder why that star seems to be in that formation every night and it travels along just so. What's going on with this planet? What's happening in the world? I saw a strange creature over in the desert. It was hiding under a rock. It was slithering around. What is that creature about? Why does it live that way? And she wrote these questions down. And she came to Solomon with the most difficult questions she could ask. Why did children disobey their parents? What should we do about this or that? We know some of the answers that he must have given because we have several books from Solomon, one called Ecclesiastes, and one called, most of it that was written by him, called the book of Proverbs. What's the book of Proverbs all about? Wise sayings and statements, where he answers tons of life's questions. And he says, listen up, boys and girls. Listen to my voice. If you want to be wise, if you want to be righteous, if you want to be good, listen to me. And so we can assume that a lot of the questions that Sheba asked, the queen of Sheba asked, we call her Sheba, her name wasn't Sheba. Her name was the queen, as far as we know. But she asked a lot of questions, and we know a lot of his wisdom. So she asked some hard questions, but every time you're going to find out Solomon had the answers. She came to him with hard questions. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train. That's that entourage, that convoy of animals, with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. Now, who in here would love to have been a fly on the wall in that room? You ever heard that expression? I'd like to be a fly on the wall? Because then nobody pays attention to a fly, right? It's just there on the wall. But a fly can hear and see everything that's going on. I would like it if I could be transported to that time and see the Queen of Sheba come in with all her camel train and all the riches, the spices from a strange land, gold and jewels and precious things, and they unloaded these camels, all kinds of stuff. And then the Queen of Sheba comes in before the great King Solomon and starts asking the hardest questions she could think of, maybe through an interpreter. But you can imagine it'd be quite the procession, right? And quite an ordeal. And there they were, communing with all that was in her heart. I hope you start to see some parallels here of how we ought to be. Jesus reprimanded the people of his day for not coming to him with questions the way the Queen of Sheba came to Solomon with questions. He says, the Queen of the South shall rise up in judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them, for she came from the utmost part of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And Jesus says, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. So if we want to be like Sheba, we don't have to travel 2,700 kilometers, but we do need to come to the wisest man, the greatest man that ever was, the Lord Jesus, and seek him and find answers. And so here we can see some parallels, some illustrations, and she's communing with him for all that was on her heart. All the things that she'd always wondered about. How does this work? What happens here? What's up with that? Why does this go like this? And everything that she asked Solomon, she found answers to. And it says in verse 3, and Solomon told her all her questions. Doesn't mean that he told her what her questions were, but she told her the answers to all of the questions that Queen of Sheba had, satisfactorily. To where she was like, really? That makes sense. I understand now. How did you know that? There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. Every question was answered. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Can you envision this for a moment? When she saw the grand palace, she was put in awe. This is where the king lives? When she saw the entrance that he made into the Lord's house and how people followed him along, and maybe at every step an animal was slaughtered and sacrificed to God. And then she saw his servants coming in, and they were clothed with the most beautiful raiment and clothing that she had ever seen. The richest, wealthiest stuff, dyed with purple perhaps. Purple was an extremely rare color back then, very difficult to get cloth dyed purple. Very, very wealthy. And she just couldn't believe her eyes. The Bible says that when she saw all this, there was like no more spirit in her. Do you know what that means? It means like, I can't believe it. Got no more breath left in me. I'm in awe. I'm in shock. I don't think we realize how extremely wealthy and rare this man's kingdom and his reign and his rule and his structures and his wealth were. And she said to the king, "It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit," she says, "I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes have seen it, and behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and thy prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard." Now, I want to tell you something. Most times when you hear about the fame of somebody, it's not quite as good as what you're hearing. Even in our situation here, sometimes somebody in the room here can be very respected, and you think, man, that person has everything together. Maybe some of you women look at another lady in the church and think, her children look so in line. They're always so well dressed. Everything is just in order. Every time we go to their house, it's clean, it's spick and span. You think, wow. But if you were to sit down with her and spend time and ask her all the questions that are on your heart, you might find, oh, well, she's not quite as impressive as I thought. She's got a few things to learn yet. She is still struggling in some areas. But this Queen of Sheba, she traveled from the utmost part of the world all the way to see the king because she had heard some incredible stories that she thought they can't be true. It just can't be. That's too much. And then she came to see it, and she said, I didn't believe it. But now that I'm here, I'm realizing that not even half of the truth was told to me. You're way better than I heard. You're wiser than I could have imagined. You're richer than I've ever thought possible. You have more stuff and more organization and more beauty going on around you than I ever thought possible. And I can guarantee you that Jesus is better than you think. He has more to offer than you realize. He's not just a guy that gets you to go to church. He is so glorious, so beautiful, so far greater than Solomon that he pales in comparison. He's like a cockroach compared to Jesus. And yet, the Queen of Sheba is aghast. She is flustered. She can't imagine how this could all be true. And she tells the king, this is amazing. I hadn't even heard the half of it. Happy are thy men, she says. Happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee. You know, Solomon had men that stood before him all the time to go and come and do everything that he beckoned. Constantly he had men that stood, and they were perfectly organized, perfectly in line, perfectly in order all the time. Servants always there before him, and they hear thy wisdom. These men, these servants, they ought to be happy because they're blessed. They get to hear your wisdom all the time. Blessed be the Lord thy God, she says, which delighted in thee to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold and of spices of very great store and precious stones, and there came no more such abundance of spices as these which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Spices were very valuable. Can you imagine if all you had ever eaten was just plain meat, and then suddenly somebody introduced to you salt and pepper and some cumin maybe, or some other spice that you might really enjoy, or you had oatmeal, but you'd never had like sugar and cinnamon in there, and all of a sudden you get to enjoy these great new flavors. She brought some extraordinary flavors that he had never tasted before, and smells that he had never smelled. The most amazing spices that you could ever imagine was brought by the Queen of Sheba. And the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees, and I have no idea what kind of trees those are, but they must be pretty interesting. and precious stones. And the king made of the algum trees pillars for the house of the Lord, for the king's house, harps also and psalteries for singers. There came no such almug trees, nor were there seen unto this day. So he's going to kind of give you a description now of what the king's house and his riches looked like. So if you can follow along with what I'm saying, try to imagine all the stuff that's happening. Trees brought from a long ways off on ship because they don't have any near Jerusalem. And then he takes those trees and he cuts them up. He makes instruments, he makes pillars, he makes beautiful ornaments and all kinds of precious things. And King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants, and she has a lot of stuff that she's now taking back with her to Sheba. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Now, I wish I had done some conversions here to see how much gold really is this. But who here has ever even seen a handful of gold? We don't really see gold much anymore, do we? We have paper money and we have cards that represent money, but gold is really what's valuable. Paper is just what we count it to be worth, but gold is the real precious stuff. But thousands of pounds of gold brought in every year to Solomon. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went to one target. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went to one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So he built a house in the forest, and he made these beautiful gold shields made of 3 pounds of gold, and he made beautiful targets just for ornamentation. Very, very rich, expensive stuff. Moreover, the king, now listen to this, the king made a great throne of ivory. A great throne of ivory, and overlaid it with the best gold. Do you know what ivory is? The tusks of elephants. How big is a tusk from an elephant? We can probably imagine they're big, right? Like this big, and maybe this big around, something like that. Really big at the start, and then they go to a point. How would you make a throne out of elephant tusks? You'd have to cut off a lot of elephant tusks, wouldn't you? So imagine thousands of elephants perhaps being killed, maybe just being trapped and their tusks being cut off. Then they got to bring it back and somehow work that ivory into a throne. This could probably appear somewhat like a throne, just a very meager, humble type of throne. But Solomon's had many, many steps going up, and you had to walk up these steps. And when you came into the palace, you would see Solomon sitting up there on his throne, arrayed in beautiful raiment. And this great palace had this massive throne, all kinds of steps made from ivory, some of the most precious stuff in the world. And then he took gold and covered up the ivory. So now we're going to walk around on some of the most precious stuff in the world, and you can't even see it. You don't even know that it's made of ivory. It's very hard, very tough stuff, and they covered it over with beautiful gold. How much money would you have to go and find several thousand elephants, take their tusks, make a throne, and then just cover it over with gold? Millions. Billions and billions, if we counted dollars. But we're just talking pounds of gold. He overlaid it with the very best of gold. The throne had, listen to this, 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind. And there were stays on either side on the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays. I can't quite picture this perfectly. I've seen people draw pictures of it. Beautiful lions carved out of ivory perhaps and overlaid with gold, and these beautiful 6 steps going up and a big round something or other behind the throne, and there sat the grand king Solomon. And 12 lions stood there on the one side, and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not the like made in any kingdom. No kingdom in the world had a throne like this one. Solomon looked around the world. He could see, obviously, 2,700 kilometers away. He heard news. He heard information. He saw what other kings were doing. And he said, well, I'm just going to go do more. I'm going to do better. Mine's going to be superior. It's going to be grander. It's going to be way more to look upon than every other king. And so no kingdom in the world had a throne like King Solomon's. And now listen to this. In all King Solomon's drinking vessels. What's a drinking vessel? Do you know, boys? A drinking vessel? A cup. What is your cups made of? What kind does your mom give you mostly? I know what kind we give him mostly. Plastic ones. Because when they fall, they don't break. And then it doesn't really matter if he chews on the edge for a while. It doesn't matter. We just throw them out and buy new ones. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were not made of plastic, nor were they made of glass. Glass would have been fairly rare then too. It says all of his drinking vessels were of gold. How heavy would your cup be, do you think? Every time you lifted your cup to take a drink, you would realize, I'm the richest man in the world. I am still the richest man in the world. You would be constantly reminded, because your arm would start to feel how heavy your cup is. I just have everything I could ever want and more. All his drinking vessels were made of gold. And all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Listen to this statement. Silver. Who thinks silver is pretty valuable stuff? If you have a necklace made of silver or a ring made of silver or some jewelry made of silver, it's precious. Listen to this. All of his vessels were made of gold. None of it was made of that nasty silver stuff, because it was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. Somebody brought in some silver to present to the king. He'd be like, really? You're going to bring me silver? Would you find that outside, laying on the ground somewhere? Precious, precious silver. Come on. It's not counted of anything in my day. Solomon said, that's nothing to me. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and listen to this next statement. This will be a fun one for you boys. And apes and peacocks. So not only did he have all kinds of cool stuff, but he had critters everywhere that were trained, that would do what he wanted to do. He had trained the apes probably to be his servants. So the Queen of Sheba comes in, and then she sees an ape walk in with a drink perhaps and present it to the king. And she's like, what in the world? How does this work? This guy just had everything. And if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll see he had pools, and he had vineyards, and he had servants, and he had chariots, and he had horsemen, and he had everything you could think of. Very, very wealthy. I think that's kind of the point. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. God had put wisdom into Solomon's heart. And all the world came and said, teach us, Solomon. Show us how. Tell us what it's like. How does this work? Explain that to us. And they all came to Solomon. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, garments and armor and spices, horses and mules, a rate year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, which he bestowed in the cities for chariots, and with the king at Jerusalem. All over the place, chariots and horsemen and beautiful, wealthy things. And the king made silver, here's another extreme statement, the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones. Remember, like I said, you found some silver outside on the ground? It was like walking up to the palace. You were walking on silver as you came up. Something that you just walk on, no big deal. Like we treat stones today. Can you guys go get the stones off the grass? There's a bunch of silver chunks out there. Can you get them out of the way? They're being a nuisance to us. Can you imagine? I can't. It's beyond my understanding. The king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. You know what we have a lot of On our yard, all the way around the yard, there's these trees that keep coming up. What are they called again? Sumac trees. They're like weeds. They grow everywhere. And that's probably what the sycamore was like. And he said now he had made cedars to be that way. Who knows what cedar wood is? Cedar trees. I like cedar. I once did a job of cedar where I did a whole house in siding, cedar siding. Has a really nice smell, and it ages very beautifully. It lasts for like 25, 30 years. Sometimes people put roofing on their house made of wood. That's cedar shingles. It has a nice smell and a really nice look to it. And he made cedar so common, it was like the sumac around our place, just growing like weeds. It was everywhere. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt in linen yarn. The king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price, and a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites, for the kings of Syria, did they bring them out by their means. So the whole world, listen, boys and girls, for a few moments, the whole world all around was coming to Jerusalem because they saw the wealth, they saw the wisdom, they saw the abundance. They brought their best stuff in, and Solomon just became richer and richer and richer and richer and richer. And he has peace all around. Nobody wants to fight him. They saw his men training in the streets. They saw the organization of his army. They saw the troops marching. They saw all the servants. They just said, let's leave them alone. Let's just pay them a tribute every year. Let's keep making them richer. There's nothing we want to touch this man for. He is extraordinary. Now, what do we know about Jesus when he was on this earth? Was he like Solomon? No. Did he have stuff? You know, Jesus said he has nowhere to lay his head. He said, come, follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. And yet, he said, Jesus himself said, I am greater than Solomon. In what way is Jesus then greater than Solomon? Solomon sinned very much. Next chapter, we're going to see he was a wicked man. He became a wicked man. But I want to submit to you that Jesus was greater than Solomon in every way. We think, well, not in wealth, obviously. Yes, he was. Who is Jesus Lord of? God. Not quite. Lord of heaven and earth. Solomon had all the stuff in Jerusalem and the surrounding area at his disposal. Jesus has all the stuff. Right? All the stuff is his. The cattle on 1,000 hills, every mountaintop, every valley, every river, all the wealth of the earth, every piece of hidden gem and jewel that's found in the depths of the earth, every ivory tusk in the world is his. All the most beautiful, precious things in all the world are his. And more than that, he had a throne that made Solomon's look like a little anthill. It's up in heaven. One day we're going to see it. And we ought to, you children now should do the same. You ought to come to Jesus and say, what do I need to know? What do I need to learn? You are so awesome. You are so great. You're so much greater than Solomon. Solomon was impressive because we could see his wealth. But with Jesus, we know his wealth and we believe it. We trust. And he was purer. He was kinder. He was more righteous. He was more just. And above all things, for my sake, that I can think of, is he's absolutely full of grace. You know what grace is? Grace means that Jesus loved you, even though you don't deserve it. Jesus died for you. He took all his wealth and he left it aside, and he became a man, took upon himself the form of a servant, became obedient to death, even the death of the old rugged cross, right? And now one day you get to be as wealthy as Jesus. Not as wealthy as Solomon. That's not enough. You get to be all that Jesus has. You get to be one with him through the work of the cross. That's grace. That's riches. That's wealth, right? All right, let's go back to our seats.